Welcome to the Explainer. Today we're going to talk about a law that's well over a century old, from 1881 to be exact, but its principles are still a huge part of our financial lives. It's the law that gives a simple piece of paper the power of money and the real, legal weight of a promise.
So let's just jump right in. Why is that? What exactly turns a simple check, or even a handwritten IOU, into something our entire system of commerce and trust relies on? Well, the answer is all in the legal framework that stands behind it.
And to unpack that, we're going to follow the life of a typical check, from start to finish. First, we'll get a handle on what these instruments actually are. Then, we'll meet the key people involved in any transaction. After that, we'll track the check's journey, see what happens at its moment of truth at the bank, and finally, we'll get into the pretty serious consequences when that promise gets broken.
Okay, first things first. Let's meet the big three instruments that are really at the heart of this entire act. These are the absolute foundations of financial promises on paper.
The first one is a promissory note. Now, Section 4 of the Act is pretty clear on this. Think of it as the most formal "I promise to pay you" you can get. It's a direct, unconditional promise to pay a certain amount. You see these a lot in personal loans or for business financing. It's simple, it's direct, and it is legally powerful.
Next up, we have the bill of exchange. Now this is different. It's not a promise, it's an order. Here, one person is actually instructing a second person to pay a third person. So it's less of an "I will pay you" and more of a "Hey, you pay this person on my behalf."
And that brings us to the one we all recognize, the check. Defined in Section 6, a check is really just a special kind of bill of exchange. The key difference is that the order to pay is always directed at a bank, and it's always payable the moment it's presented, or, as the law says, on demand.
And this table just lays it all out so perfectly. A promissory note, that's a two-party promise. A bill of exchange and a check, those are three-party orders. But the really crucial difference, the thing that makes a check, is that the one being ordered to pay, the drawee, is always a bank, and the payment is always on demand.
Right. So every one of these instruments is kind of like a little play with a very specific cast. So let's meet the key players who are involved in the journey of a check, as the Act defines them. First, you've got the drawer. As per Section 7, this is the person who kicks the whole thing off. They write the check, they sign their name, and they are the one making that initial financial commitment.
So the drawer gives their order to the drawee. The drawee is the one who is directed to pay. And in the world of checks, this is always the bank that holds the drawer's account.
And who gets the money? Well, that's the payee. Section 7 tells us the payee is the person whose name is on the check. They're the one who's supposed to receive the funds. Simple as that.
Now this is where the negotiable part of negotiable instrument really shines. An endorser, as Section 115 defines it, is anyone who literally signs the back of the check to transfer their right to get paid to somebody else. This is how a single check can legally change hands.
So how does that transfer actually work? This ability to pass the instrument along called negotiation, and it's the legal engine that allows a check to basically function like money, moving from one person to another.
And the law is super clear that it's a two-step process. First, you have the endorsement, that's the signature on the back, and second, you have the delivery. You have to physically hand it over. You need both for that transfer to be legal. It's a simple but really vital process that creates this clear chain of ownership.
So no matter how many hands a check passes through, its journey always leads to this one critical moment: presentment for payment. This is the end of the line. The paper goes to the bank and a decision has to be made. This is when we find out if the promise holds up.
And at this point, there are really only two ways it can go. On the left, you've got the ideal outcome: payment in due course. The Act says this is when the bank pays up in good faith, the transaction is complete, the promise is fulfilled. A happy ending. But on the right, you have dishonor. This is when the bank, for whatever reason, refuses to pay. The promise is officially broken, and that single act triggers all the serious legal consequences we're about to dive into.
So what happens when a check is dishonored? Yeah, this isn't just a simple mistake. Chapter 17 of the Act lays out some very specific and, frankly, very serious consequences.
Section 138 does not pull any punches. When a check is returned because of insufficient funds, the person who wrote it shall be deemed to have committed an offense. That wording is huge. It elevates a bounce check from just a civil problem to a potential criminal one. And the penalties? They're significant. For this offense, the possible prison time can go up to 2 years.
And on top of that,
Or maybe instead of jail time, the court can levy a fine that could be as much as twice the amount written on the check. It's a really powerful deterrent meant to make sure people take these instruments seriously.
But, and this is a really important but, it's not automatic. The law is also very precise. To prosecute someone, a few things have to happen first. The check had to be presented on time. The payee has to send a written demand for the money within 30 days of it bouncing, and then the drawer gets another 15 days to pay up. Only if they fail after all of that can legal proceedings begin.
Which brings us to a final thought. This whole legal structure was designed in 1881 for pieces of paper. So as we move faster and faster into a world of instant, digital payments, you have to wonder, what happens to the fundamental principles of this act? Things like trust and negotiation and real liability for a broken promise. How do those ideas evolve? That's the big question this 140-year-old law leaves us with today.